Hi and welcome to this week's Thete's Mailbox. I'm Thete and we're going to be discussing, some of the more interesting comments that you've been putting on my channel from the past week. A lot of it includes lore, both past, present and future, as well as what there is in the game in BfA that people find the most fun. So the first thing we do is the where's the mailbox. So last week, this is where it was. Quite a few people got it right. It was about half a dozen people. In terms of a lot of people put in Dreambow, for example. Good enough for me if you put Feralus and it's the Emerald Nightmare Gateway or the gateway where the big nasty dragons come out of. That's fine too. The reason I put that one down, not to try and be awkward, it was just, as I say, the day before I decided to do the mailbox last week. I say decided to do. I do it every Sunday, but before I was doing, I was just thinking that actually how much fun I always seem to have when the Dragons of Nightmare were a thing in vanilla. There's 4 different locations where you could go for them, but somehow I always find it more fun when I was going to Feralus for it. I'm not quite sure why, but it was just in my head for some reason. Anyway, this week's mailbox is here. You need to say which zone it is in, and you need to say the specific name. This time it does have a specific name when you go here. Flashes up on your screen, it's on the map. So that's what I'm looking for, please. You don't have to be super specific, but the name of the place I am in and the name of the zone, please. So, getting on to comments from this week, let's have a look. So the first one says, you might not have had an actual choice. So what we're talking about is the choices we're allegedly getting in BfA. We've supposedly had a few of them already. It says, but let's not forget that the game can remember what choice you made in the past. Who knows, perhaps in 8.1.5 the choices you made in 8.1 actually begin to matter. But we also know that our choices in the end will not matter unless the finale of the expansion is a different scenario and video for you based on your choices in the past. Would be kind of fun, different endings like Mass Effect. Except it wouldn't though, would it? Because we've still got to finish the expansion in the same place. I have no doubt, because Blizzard have said this is going to happen, that there'll be a slight divergence. Maybe there'll be certain quests where both types of player will do the quest, but you'll do a slightly different one to the person who picked the other thing. The thing is, one, they can't do that too much, because if you think about it this way, if you have a choice between two things, like we've had between supporting Sylvanas, supporting Southfang, that suggests that the next time something happens, what we do depends on the choice we made in the past. So that means there now needs to be 2 outcomes. And then if it carries on down that road, then, all of a sudden after that point, there's been 4 different things been done. So then you need 4 different things to happen then. And then 8 different things, 16 different things. Before long, they're creating content that most people are not going to see, which is the thing they moaned about with Legion in terms of creating all this class content, this spec content. So they're really not going to do very many of these. I wouldn't even think there's going to be 1 per major patch, because I think that would be too many different outcomes at the end. And also at the end of it, no matter what we do, we're still going to end up with the overall story being a particular thing is going to happen to the Horde. We know the Horde is going to change because Blizzard have said so by the end of the expansion. Multiple times, multiple people have said so. And that's going to be the same for all of us, because we're all going to start off at the same point from the start of the next expansion. So if you're going to say that they're going to do anything where it supposedly means meaningful choices, that means that those meaningful choices are actually going to be meaningless. It can't be any other way, because we still have to arrive at the same conclusion. Come what may, the story of BfA is going to conclude in exactly the same way for everyone. It could not be otherwise. All they can really do is try and amend our role in it as we make certain choices that in the end do nothing at all, because it's an MMO. In a single player game, of course you can make choices. These can affect the outcome, but in an MMO, really, no, not so much. It's very difficult. The only way I think Star Wars gets away with it a little bit is because that aspect of it is your personal story. Where you make your choices in your personal story doesn't affect the world or anything, or any larger politics or anything like that. Whereas in WoW it does. We're sort of very much involved in the changing of the world It's all. I mean, that's the problem with it all being too grand. I think all the story being too grand. We're too powerful that our choices, have to have far-reaching consequences. So if as players we're given genuine choices, well, they can't have far-reaching consequences because the world's got to be the same for us all. But anyway, we'll see what they mean by meaningful choices over the coming months, won't we? But I strongly suspect it won't actually be. Just as I don't actually believe we've had a choice so far at all, of any description, meaningful or not. And to the next one. So this does my head. I thought I tackled this last year. I suppose not everyone saw it, though. So it says, anyway, as the saying goes, all roads lead to Rome. So again, about the idea of choice. Choices or not, they all lead to the same place. So exactly what I was talking about. It says, you get the illusion of choice, aka the choices don't ultimately matter. Sylvanas is still going to die by your hand. I don't believe so. Because she's going to be a raid boss. Trust me, they will do it. No, they won't. At this point, she's too far gone to turn back. Either she is Garros 2.0 or she will be Illidan 2.0, where she will be the saviour of Azeroth from the Void army, because as you know, the Void hates her. So what do I think? Right, here's the thing. I do believe she will sort of semi-be the saviour of Azeroth. This is what I speculated some time ago. The Void doesn't hate her. People who come up with that did not properly read that Windrunner Sisters comic. The Void does not hate Sylvanas. The Void does not fear Sylvanas. The Void is well pleased with Sylvanas. She is doing exactly what they want her to do, which is weakening Azeroth. Her actions are directly leading to the very serious weakening of Azeroth. Like, we're putting her massively at risk, fighting over her blood and all the rest of it. It's a bit like, Azeroth is bleeding. We're supposed to be covering up the wound, but she's going, no, we're just going to poke a bit more into the wound. Poke into the wound. Want more blood. So no. Where people get this from is because, Illyria obviously is a creature of the Void now, but she's not fallen to it. And the Void keeps whispering to her, of course, as does anyone that accesses the Void in this way. And it keeps telling her to kill people. And it was with Sylvanas, it was going, kill her now, blah, 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 blah. And people took that extra sense of urgency to mean that the Void wants Sylvanas dead. No, it doesn't give a shit. What it fears is not Sylvanas, it fears Illyria. It needs her to fall. Generally speaking, in fact, almost exclusively, when people decide to access the powers of the Void, they fall to the Void. Illyria is not doing this. She's not the only one, because obviously her teacher didn't either, but she is one of the very few. They need her to fall. They need her to corrupt herself. They are desperate for her to kill someone. And they obviously believe that, the extra urgency there was not because they desperately want Sylvanas to be dead, but because they thought that here was their best chance to get Illyria to murder, They probably did it in a half-hearted way with Turalyon. They probably knew she wasn't going to murder Turalyon just because they said so. But Sylvanas, she is the enemy of everything she's holding dear, albeit her sister. She is the enemy. Remember, Illyria later on said she would kill Sylvanas when they went into the Lordaeron throne room and then didn't. Imagine what the Void was saying then. And she even ignored it, even when she wanted to kill Sylvanas. Maybe that's why she didn't kill Sylvanas. Maybe that's what the Blizzard story writers will maybe try and claim later on. I don't know what the story is with Jaina, Anduin, or Gen, but maybe with Illyria, the voices were going, she was thinking to herself, the Void wants me to kill. Maybe I shouldn't kill. I don't know. Maybe she second-guessed herself. But the bottom line is, the Void do not... Why would they fear Sylvanas? Why would they hate Sylvanas? She's doing exactly what they want. No, they fear Illyria. And again... for me, I keep saying that BfA is a real slow burner of a story. There are lots of stories I cannot wait for. One is the proper story of the old gods and Ashara, but also I can't wait for Illyria to come back into it. I hope they don't leave it as late as 8.3. I hope she's got some major role to play in 8.2, because the whole thing about Illyria and becoming like a creature of the Void, but without succumbing to it. That had nothing to do with the Legion story. It started in Legion, but that was obviously seeds, very clumsily being planted. But it was a very good story, but nothing to do with Legion. Clearly to do with BfA. So the sooner they get her in, the better, I think. And in a major way. Obviously, she's been in Battle of Lordaeron, but, in a major way, I want to see her doing something. But it may not be until 8.3. That's my fear. But there you go. That's that one sorted out. Next one. It says, personally, I believe the new Warchief will either be Bane or Talanji. I know she is new to Horde, but who else? We got Gallywix. I think Bane, though, is still representing the old Horde. Talanji would be a fresh new face and with no ties to the old Horde to lead us in a new direction. I think that Talanji would be a very good shout. I certainly see that as a strong possibility. I can really seriously see that. And it would most definitely represent a new Horde. There is no doubt about that. Again, just to reiterate what Blizzard have said in interviews before BfA came out, they said that the Horde is changing. They said that Sylvanas and Saurfang both represent different aspects of the old Horde and a new Horde is going to emerge. That basically means that Sylvanas and Saurfang are not going to be leading this new Horde, of course, because they represent the old Horde, but that the character of the Horde itself may at least subtly change. Quite what Horde players are going to think, like die-hard Horde players, that is, not players like me, are going to think about that, I cannot imagine. But Talanji seems a better shout. You say about Bane being Warchief and not because he probably represents the old Horde. There is an element of that, but for me, the reason why he certainly shouldn't be is because he's so weak. He is so weak and feeble. Every time, you know, he's sort of thought about standing up to Sylvanas, he's like dropped his head and munched away. Mooched away. Anyway, no, he wouldn't be suitable as a Warchief. He's just not strong enough. Talanji, on the other hand, is not only strong enough, and as you say, does represent the new Horde. I think that would be an excellent shout. Someone tried saying Zappy Boy. Don't. I'm going to kill it. I swear, I am going to kill him. He's going to be dead, and I'm going to stand over his corpse so he can't reincarnate by the end of BfA. That is my promise. You know, he's not surviving this expansion. I'm determined of that. You know, I didn't just choose to side with Saurfang for the toy, you know. I've done it so that I can get close to him. After all, in order to stab people in the back, it is necessary to get behind them. He's dead. He's absolutely dead. On to the next one. It says, so again, in terms of sort of my belief that, you know, the Legion they've sort of done away with, obviously it's not a permanent thing, the block so goes up. But, you know, effectively, it's not a threat to us at the moment. And the Old Gods, I think the same thing. Of course, remember, Old Gods are not going to be expunged from the universe. We're just, I think, in BfA going to remove them as a threat to Azeroth. Doesn't stop more Old Gods being flung through space and randomly hitting Azeroth, but I don't believe that'd happen. But anyway, so, and I think it's to lay the foundations for a new direction in the WoW storyline. So someone's saying here, says they need to be done with the Warcraft 3 lineage, so need to finish killing off all these characters so we can have a reboot of the world, Cata 2 to fix the game from level 1 up, 3 factions to rebalance the play base. I can dream, can't I? Well, the first 2 of them, I do think so. I you know, in terms of, I do think they need to, and I at the moment think they want to finish with the Warcraft lineage. Well, not the lineage somewhat, but stop resurrecting those stories. Warcraft 3, like Warcraft 1, Warcraft 2 and Warcraft 3 all had their own storylines. They all followed from one another and they all got better. The storylines got better as you went through. Then World of Warcraft just seemed to stop. You know, the game's very good, but the storylines just kept borrowing. It was almost like, oh, we'll do the conclusion to this story and then this story. Oh, we've run out of stories. Right, we'll just go back in time or we'll go to an alternate universe. Like, stop, will you? Will you stop? MOP was brilliant for me for a number of reasons. One of which was it's genuinely new lore. It wasn't based on lore from previous stuff. Oh, yes, I know Chen Stormstout was in Warcraft 3. But in terms of the storyline was new. And that was fantastic. And then they went back to like the ultimate in dredging up old storylines in the following expansion. So I certainly think not only is it something I want, I believe it's something that's happening. A reboot of the world to fix the game from level 1 up. We know that they are, I don't know about reboot of the world as such, we know that they are looking at the leveling up process as a major project they've described. That would suggest that. So that is certainly on the cards again. I don't know how soon we're going to see this. I really don't think it's going to be this expansion, maybe the following expansion. But at long last, they are now taking it seriously, the leveling up experience. because it's mad to me that you have these two different experiences. But as to the 3 factions to rebalance the player base, this keeps cropping up, and there's 2 reasons why it will never happen. One is because it would seriously piss off a dwindling player base, and secondly, there's no benefit to it anymore. You know, I've talked about in the past with MMOs, with like PvP, World PvP, stuff like that, you absolutely need 3 factions because otherwise you get an imbalance. But that no longer is the case in World of Warcraft because all the PvP is effectively instanced. It's separated out. You know, how do you engage in PvP? Battlegrounds, instanced. Arenas, instanced. World PvP is effectively instanced now because, you know, you have your war mode on or off, no matter what realm you're on. Now, of course, there is an imbalance there, you know, but that's not going to be fixed with 3 factions. And the other thing is, if you have 3 factions, you'll then, because factions don't just exist for PvP, they exist throughout the game, in terms of excluding you from playing with certain people, you'd be splitting up friendship groups and guilds and things like that by introducing a 3rd faction. So you can't do that either. You know, the game's too long in the tooth. So yeah, it's never going to happen because you would have a riot and there isn't actually any need for it anymore. You know, there was a need for it when the game first came out. Then it would have been sensible. And you could have done it. Because although the alliance races make sense together, get rid of the gnomes and you've got 3 sensible alliance races there. You know, you could easily have had 6 more races. Well, we've got that now anyway. Into different things. Like, it never made a huge amount of sense, the Forsaken with the Horde. You know, with the Horde having orcs, Tauren and trolls made absolute sense. So the alliance and the Horde made absolute sense. And what they really should have had was, you know, a faction of dispossessed, which would have included things like the Forsaken. You know, you could have had, I don't even know. I mean, you could have had goblins with those. You could have had Worgen. I mean, Worgen are now part of the alliance. But you could have had Worgen as part of this 3rd faction, this dispossessed faction. I haven't really thought about the 3rd one. Goblins, I'm not sure would go in that. Worgen, undead. I'm sure I could think of something else that you could put in. But either way, you could have done that at the start. But now you can't, and there's no point to it. So, no, not going to happen. But in terms of the other things, I absolutely believe that. Yeah. I do believe that they're going for a brand new storyline. I really do think they're gearing up for a brand new storyline. I hope it's good. I've got high hopes because I've been waiting for that for years. And the other thing about, because it was sort of okay to begin with, vanilla was really good because it had storylines that gave you a taste of lots of things about the Warcraft lore. Even all of the different raid tiers were very different aspects of it. You had the Elemental Lords, you had the Dragonflight, you had the Old Gods, and then you had the Scourge. It was fantastic. TBC was okay because the Illidan story was a very popular story from Warcraft 3, and yes, it was a good conclusion to that. Even though they then retconned that conclusion. Then Wrath of the Lich King again made sense because, you know, you have, you know, you're expanding on the Lich King story because, you know, Arthas only just became the Lich King at the end of Warcraft 3 effectively. Then there was nothing done with that. So here you were doing a story with Arthas as the Lich King. Okay, absolutely fantastic. Even Cataclysm, you know, the idea of Deathwing coming back was not a bad idea. I just didn't think it was terribly well realised. But, you know, that idea was okay. And then after that, you know, and you had Mists of Pandaria, it was fantastic. It was new. It was like, right, yeah, we've sort of done with the old stuff. You know, it's time to get some new stuff now. Because it'd been many years and we hadn't had any new storylines until then. Because that's the problem. It's each individual expansion that sort of followed on from a Warcraft 3 storyline, in theory sounded fine, you know, but it just meant that you were going for years and years without any new storylines. And that was my issue with that. But anyway, there we go. Next one says, oh, so it's a personal one. It says, do you have any interest in expanding your roles to Holy or Tank Spec? I'm always interested to hear what you say about Rep, but since they focus on Holy, be interested to hear you talk about that too. Could be on my way to branch out in 2019. There are certain difficulties with it. So in terms of the other roles, tanking and healing. Now, I did heal, and I healed at it's considered an extremely good healer at one time, when it was a very different Well, not a different role, but a very different way to do it, of course, as a ret. Sorry, as a paladin then. The thing I always disliked about Holy, which probably doesn't exist now, is it was very interesting while you were progressing, thinking from raiding point of view, or even in a dungeon where things were going wrong. It was your time to shine, pulling the fat out of the fire. Nothing used to excite me more. It's sad, really, but nothing used to excite me more than, it's clearly a wipe at this point, but I would not let my chargers die at this point. I would keep them alive all the way through it, and only when the wipe was actually called would I then stop healing people. Except, of course, in vanilla, the Gnome Warlocks. I made sure that all the other paladins were assigned a Gnome Warlock, because what they used to do to get out of repair builds was go off and Hellfire. So I got all the paladins to heal them up until the boss actually munched them. They're not getting out of repair builds. It doesn't cost much anyway. Cloth peasants, wasting my time. So yeah, but apart from that, you obviously stop healing. But I love that. The idea that although a wipe is called, that's because some other group has messed it up. My group they might be messing it up, but they would be alive to mess it up at least. Loved that. Healing people up beyond all reason. Problem was that then you would have people would learn the fights and they'd get better at the fights, and then you'd be doing those fights and you're thinking, people aren't standing in the shit anymore. People aren't taking damage. Boring. So boring. Nothing I can realistically do. And there wasn't anything you could do. Nowadays, of course, you could just do a bit of DPS at that time. That's what a good healer would do. If it's getting a bit light on the old healing, everything's been managed, do a bit of DPS. So, you could argue, had it been like that then, maybe I'd have been okay still doing the healing. The thing is, though, the Ret Paladin was very much that sort of archetype of the Paladin from Dungeons and Dragons that I was really wanting to replicate. Now, in terms of doing healing now, the problem is that you need to really practice it. So you have to become attuned with how much the heal does. There's not a rotation, there's not a priority system. You need to do as much healing as quickly as possible that's going to heal someone up before you believe they're going to take a fatal amount of damage. So there's an awful lot of things to consider, a lot of triage in there, because it's not about who's taken the most damage, it's about who's going to take the next lot of damage. They become the priority, because you don't want to let people die. Let people be on 5% health, sure. It might screw around with some Azeroth traits, I don't know. But tough. It's about keeping people alive. And the highest priority one might actually be someone who's only lost 10% health. But they're about to get munched because it's a tank. So, you've got all these considerations. You need to have an intuitive understanding of how much each heal is going to do, so you can select the right one, and how long it's going to take, because you sort of think to yourself, how long have you got before that next big hit comes in? So it's all about that, and that takes practice. It takes practice, and you'd have to do it in challenging situations. Because I tried a few times in the past few expansions doing it in LFR. There is no point. That you can't improve anything in LFR. Maybe DPS, but tanking and healing, because your mistakes are forgiven so easily that you're not under enough pressure to do it, and you don't really know whether you're doing well or not when you're healing anyway, as far as I can tell. Could be doing completely the wrong things, and no idea. But at the same time, what you're asking people to do is to let you in their raids while you do a crap job while you're learning, and then potentially, obviously, people are going to die while you're learning because you're going to make mistakes. So it's a very involved process, and not one that I'm all that bothered about. When it comes to tanking, I find tanking boring. I don't like doing it. Do not like doing it. I know it would make it easier to get to groups, but I just find it rigidly boring. And I'm not saying it's easy, because it's a lot more difficult these days, but it's still the same level of boredom, because all you're doing, you just need to know. I mean, for most of the time, you're just DPSing, and at other times, you just need to know when the big hits are coming in. So when you need some sort of mitigation for that, or when you need a major cooldown for that. So it's really just knowing when these things are happening, knowing when to tank swap if it's in a raid, that sort of situation. But I just find it dull, so no, I'd never have any interest in tanking except when I absolutely have to. I have had to tank at times, but no, don't like it. Holy, I am not opposed to healing. It's just the amount of, in a game where I'm now playing casually, the amount of time I'd want to put in to be able to do it well, again, is, and as I say, you'd need to be able to do it in challenging content where, as you make mistakes, you're asking other people to have a rough time in that content. So, no. I'm afraid not. Next one, it says, so this was related to the Zandalari trolls coming out. I was specifically talking about Zandalari troll paladins, but Zandalari trolls. It says you have to get to Blizzard, though, the biggest money-making scheme since the start of the expansion. I don't agree. I think, as money-making goes, this is like opening up the gift shop after the zoo has closed. They've already lost a crap load of subs. Yes, we can't, be 100% on it, but I think, we are. With Blizzard's reaction I am certain. So they've lost a lot of, and those people knew that it was coming, but it still didn't, it's on your itchy nose. It still didn't save the situation for them. Now, who knows? Maybe when they are available, a load of people will come back, but it won't be as many as they've lost. This was, would have been so much better at the start of the expansion, and it wasn't. So they've missed out on the maximum, and actually they've missed out on a lot of money making opportunities. The two biggest ones, I think, are this. Although they brought out Dark Iron Dwarfs and Magor Orcs fairly early on, they didn't bring out what people really wanted. And I'm not saying people didn't want the Magor Orcs and the Dark Iron Dwarfs, but what people really wanted were the Zandalari trolls and the Kulturan humans. And we're still waiting. We are still waiting. And so I think they've lost potential there. And then there's the Dreadweight mount. I've talked about this before. So, they have this Dreadweight mount, this unique mount. All right, it's based on, as eagle-eyed viewers noticed, another mount. But it's still different enough that you would look at it as a unique mount. And they brought it out to try and keep people subscribed. Okay, fair enough. Absolutely. That's exactly what I would do, in fact. I'd do that several times a year, in fact. But what they did is said, right, you need to buy a 6-month sub and then you get it. That's just silly. No one's going to pay a 6-month sub for it. So if they weren't going to stay subbed anyway, that's not worth it for the mount. I mean, if you're not going to stay subbed anyway, you don't need a mount. If they'd done it for 3 months, they would have been on better ground, because I think for the price of a 3-month sub, some people may be willing to pay that for a mount. When you look at the prices of the actual mounts that Blizzard sell, and some people will be thinking, yeah, maybe. But what they absolutely should have done, first of all, they should have done it for 3 months and not 6, and I think they'd have got more use out of it. And I would do 4 mounts a year, so they could do it throughout the year. And the other thing is that I wouldn't have done it for have to buy a 3-month sub. I'd have done it for if you are subbed for the next 3 months, then you get it. And if you're paying a month at a time, then on the 3rd month, then you get it. If you're paying it 3 months at a time, then the next time you pay your 3-month sub, then you get it. That's how they should do it. Because at the when it comes down to it, because that 6 months hasn't expired yet, but when it has, so the people who bought the 6-month sub got their mount already, and they'll have paid for that 6 months of sub. By that time, I will have paid for 6 months on 2 different accounts and a few months on another account as well. So I'd have paid more, but don't have the mount, because I was actually thinking of doing it, but in the end decided I wasn't actually that bothered about it. But there's the situation. I'd have actually bought more subs in that time and not got it, which is just a bit silly, So yeah, I don't think they're very good, even when they do something that is clearly a money-making scheme, which the allied races absolutely are, as well as a bit of a time sink because they hope you level them up from scratch. Well, from scratch for an allied race, that is. I just don't see that they maximise the money they can make from these things just by silly little things. I just don't think they know what they're doing. Next one. So, nice little lore one on the light. So it says, it's interesting that some ascribe the paladins some holy or good mantra, which I certainly would have done. It says, even though the Scarlet Crusade used the light as well, which is perfectly true. It says, I think the light, no matter their source, requires a strong will to wield. The Blood Elves can also tap it from the Sunwell now, as their gold eyes indicate. The gold eyes actually is actually to commemorate the fact that the light was used to cleanse the Sunwell. That's what Blizzard said. So that's the official thing there. says, if you look at power in WoW as a whole, a large theme is how the power is used rather than why. If you look at the Blood Elves during Burning Crusade, the two sub-factions were going in opposite directions with Fellbloods and Blood Knights. Other expansions like Mop using Old Gods as Garrosh or Titan as Lashen, I think you mean. So in my opinion, if a race has a reasonable justification, then why not? But, yeah, see, this is true. I mean, the Scarlet Crusade is a big thing. I could almost do a video just on this topic, actually. But just, relatively quickly. I don't think it made a terrible amount of sense that the Scarlet Crusade could wield the light way back when. But now, actually, with Legion lore, it actually makes a bit more sense. Because we now don't really consider the light to be benevolent, even though it's described in Blizzard's own, chronicles as a benevolent force. I think the cinematic between Zera and Illidan shows that it's not. That although it's not out and out cruel and malevolent like the Void, it uses benevolence as a tool rather than a philosophy. Because when it doesn't get its own way, we can see from what Zera tried to do to Illidan that it will just force its will upon us. So we're now seeing the light in a slightly different light. And potentially then you could argue that the Scarlet Crusade could wield the light, because what were they doing with it? They were still attacking the undead. They were attacking the Scourge. That was what they were doing. That was their main. If that's all they did, then they would have been fine, but they did an awful lot of other horrible things as well. And it's possible that obviously the light wanted the Scourge dead, or finished. It was already dead, I suppose. And so that's why they were able to access that power, because it was still being used to fight their enemies, even though it wasn't being used entirely benevolently. So, yeah, I think the Legion story puts a different slant on it, but always at the time I always felt that it was very strange that you had the Scarlet Crusade. And I always sort of imagined it at the time as maybe, they learned to wield the light as good people, and then those people just changed but didn't actually lose their connection to the light. Because maybe, as I thought at the time, the light wasn't necessarily sentient, as a force. And maybe it still isn't. I don't know. But you're sort of supposed to think that it is. So yeah, but you could talk about something like this for ages, couldn't you? But yeah, I think the Legion story makes a sense of it now, in a way that I don't think really did before. Let's have a look. So, says, I was watching Warcraft yesterday where they talked to Josh from Method. He said that if it wasn't for the fact that the raids are really fun to do, he would quit WoW instantly. That's how boring he thinks everything else in the game is. The raids are very good, and I agree. I think Battle for Dazar'alor, sorry, I hate that word. Sounds amazing, but unlike for Josh, that's not enough for me to come back. Hate AP, and until 8.2, when that semi goes away, when your Azeroth armor works regardless of net level, you'll come back. Until 8.2 comes out, I'm staying away from this game no matter how fun Battle for Troll City is. Of course, you'd be able to do Battle for Troll City when you came back in 8.2 anyway. Yeah, so I think obviously in Josh's case, it's an extra thing. See, I always used to think for many years, if I wasn't raiding, I would quit. And in fact, I did, because in Tier 7, that was such a piss poor raid, like we did it in one day, that I actually did quit the game. Not immediately. I decided to carry on with the guild for the sake of, letting them get a replacement. So I quit at the end of that tier. And then there was a brilliant tier followed it. Who'd have thunk it? But yeah, so I actually did. And I would have done, for even just a couple of years ago, I would have quit the game. But now there's enough in it that I stay subscribed and potter about a little bit. I'm not, at least it was doing Mythic Plus Tons. I'm not even doing those now. But I'm still pottering about a little bit. And I'm still enjoying the storyline, even though I have my little gripes, So it's sort of okay from that point of view. Obviously, it means I'm not playing very much. I'm maximum of once a week, quite frankly. But in Josh's case, of course, the extra content which is not that fun, and obviously fun is a subjective term, is going to be extra not fun, because I obviously know, as being a Mythic Raider, not even at his level, it's because you have to do it. The content you have to do, even if in itself you might like it if you didn't have to do it, all of a sudden you will resent it. It's like, I like cheesecake. Well, I don't have any anymore. But I like cheesecake. But if I was made to have it with every meal, I would soon start resenting cheesecake. And it's the same thing here. It's that sort of enforced aspect to it. And the fact that you have to do more than you want to do. You know, if you enjoy something, there's a certain amount you want to enjoy. Beyond that, it becomes tedious. And he has to do the ridiculous amounts of these content. And if he already didn't find them fun even on a casual level, he's going to be especially resentful of them, having to do lots of it. And even some stuff that he would enjoy on a casual level, he's still going to resent. So it's no surprise to me that a serious Mythic Raider would find other aspects of the game not at all fun. And it's because he has to do it. Whereas I think some of it is more enjoyable. It's not that bad if you can do exactly as much as you want to do. But absolutely, there was a time, certainly a few years ago, where I don't think the rest of the game was good enough. And so I suppose technically I'm saying that the casual content's got a bit better. It's just that, you just resent it as a raider. You just begin to resent it. But of course, if there's someone who doesn't find all that content fun, and you're not a serious raider, then the raids aren't going to be good enough, even though they're traditionally, they're almost exclusively the best content. There's been maybe 2 or 3 raids in the game's history that have fallen a bit flat. But, they've not been common. Mostly they're excellent. The raid encounter team. Even though I think they should give more consideration to different raid roles and things like that. But the encounters themselves are almost always fun, I would say. And to the last one. Good old communication issues again. It says, communication issues stem from a few sources, lack of understanding of issues with the clients, inability to speak well enough about the issues, so that they are understood by both partners about the attempts to remedy and or lack of confidence on the client side of the company. I think they need to hire someone to overhaul how they communicate changes, why they are implemented, keep conversations going so the consumer seems engaged, or just fire law. I would certainly agree that they need to hire someone who is going to properly communicate things. The problem is, if they did that and that person was undermined because there are people there, senior people such as Ian Hazard-Costas, who want to keep the player base at arm's length, then they'd be scuppered. It wouldn't work anyway. But having someone who understands how to communicate in charge of it all would massively improve it. And there is an element of that. Obviously there are some things they are just getting wrong and they are not listening to. And I know the way developers always approach it is it's always their attitude that, well, you don't really understand. They give you a little pat on the head. You don't really understand. But just tell us what you think's wrong with it and we'll try and explain why we're doing things and you'll see that it's actually the best thing. The thing is, sometimes that's true. Sometimes we don't understand certain things and sometimes we would understand. If we were made to understand why they were doing things, then sometimes we would agree with what they're saying. There are some times when they don't, because sometimes they actually just do something that is stupid. But either way, they would certainly solve an awful lot of the angst if they at least communicated the real reasons for doing certain things, not lies. Because when it's a clear lie, then you're not really, you're fooling a very small portion of the player base, and it's just silly. So the complaints are still going to carry on. So tell the truth about it. But more importantly, you do need to you can't go from a situation where you're defending something to the hilt for 2 months and then you turn around and say, oh yeah, we totally agree with you. Oh yeah. It's like, what? Stop it. It's such a clumsy attempt at PR. But yeah, so they have shown a lack of understanding about what the issues are that we have with certain things. They also put too much emphasis on little tweaks in the game that we not only don't like, but that don't fundamentally change enough about it. Ultimately, they need to come from a point of view as they want as many people to play this game as possible. They don't even come from that fundamental business point of view, the developers. And that's so. I think you don't just have a disconnect between the developers and the player base. I think you've got a disconnect between the player base and the developers, and the more sort of businessy side of it, the people who are interested in the corporate side of the company. And yeah, and it needs someone who, between all these different agencies, can communicate ideas. And they don't seem to have that at all. But there you go. I mean, this will just keep rumbling on because I don't see it getting any better. It may even get worse, but I certainly don't see it getting any better. It'll be as it is. I think Blizzard now as a company has fundamentally changed. And I might actually follow up that with another video because people are sort of getting all excited about this Bungie thing. It's really not what they think it is in terms of how it might affect Blizzard. But maybe I'll do that this week, who knows. But anyway, that's this week's mailbox. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content, click the bell notification to be notified of the further content. Comment down below, of course, including where the mailbox is, and share with anyone else who might also be interested. And until next time, I'll see you later.